Yeah, it's going.
And select
Going.
the
Okay,
right.
I think it's going. All right. Okay,
Okay, sharing my screen now.
there we are.
Let me know if you see it
Okay.
and if this is working properly. So you should be seeing the presentation mode now. Okay, good evening, everyone. Dick made gave out the short bio of my work. Okay, and I'm not going to go into details in that because you received my background in your emails. So if you're interested, you can go get back there. I just want to explain that I started working with software process improvement since I was working and studying at the same time on my second year at university. And I was studying computer science. It wasn't computer science; it was electronics and computers to become an electronics and computers engineer. But I always worked in software management, and played several roles in the area, and was very interested in software processes and in the CMI in particular. So when I got to get hired by an organization that was trying to achieve the CMMI level 5, I was part of the team, and by then I was doing project management as well, and that's when I met Bots and his work, and I was just too curious to understand the difficulties that companies were having at the time to implement high maturity levels, which is something that we overcame in time. But by 2008, 2007, 2008, and 2009, it was a major concern of the SCI around this topic. So I did a PhD. I decided to do a PhD on this area to understand the problem, what were the causes, do some assessment of and qualitative assessment of organizations that had achieved the maturity level 5, and to understand if they were getting the results they expected and why they weren't in case they weren't. And at the end, I was working for a long time with the SCI, the Software Engineering Institute, with the SEMA group led by David Zubrau, and at the Department of the Anita Carlton. And I always participated in all SCTGs, and yeah, I did a lot of work over there. And my current job is related with a big retailer in Portugal, and I'm still in love with processes. So that's why I'm here. I think I still work and publish whenever I can, and so I was invited to be part of this committee, to voting committee of the Watts Humphrey Software Process Achievement Award, and I think it's very important to talk about this award, as it is not easy to make process improvements and show their value, but a lot of guys that are and when I say guys and girls, of course, that are working and moving around the spins are doing process improvements every day. So my idea was, okay, this is the kind of audience that's maybe doing the right things to get nominated and should know a little bit better about the award achievement and how you can submit yourself, or any other individual, and get a chance to be nominated and at the end be a winner. So today I'm going to give you a little introduction about Humphrey and the award itself, and Dick, of course, will know more about Humphrey than I do, about the nomination, and give you the important dates, and we'll talk about the previous winner at the end. Okay, so as some of you may know, What's Humphrey received a leading innovators of a prize given by the President of the United States in 2005, which was George Bush by then. And it was a great honor to receive such a prize. He was a man that started his work on hardware, and he was leading teams that weren't on work that he wasn't used to do. So it was a very, and inspires me on my daily work, and hopefully many others, because he managed people without knowing how to do the job, but was curious enough and brave enough to admit that and make all the questions and necessary questions. And that's very important when we are dealing with processes, because who better knows the process than the people who are actually doing the job. And then it transitioned to software, and we thought, okay, so maybe the laws of hardware can be applied to software, and we can manage the process that way. But that is not true. It's not a linear transition, and so the software industry has evolved a lot in the past years with the work of many people, including Watts. People that were also working on empirical software engineering. We have the example of Barbara Kitchenham, who built a body of knowledge that is incredible. So we have this person who worked at IBM for 28 years. He taught things he didn't know before that, and he was working in areas he wasn't aware of, and creating things, because there were no computer programs when he first started teaching, which is very admirable in a person. And he joined the SEI in 1986. I can tell you that I was 6 years old. So yeah, sorry. and he was already with these questions, so he continued to work on this. And he's known as the father of software, of software quality. And this is similar to what HP did when they went to Japan and get Toyota's processes in order to get them to the software industry, and got to the conclusion that they needed to change. And what we know nowadays is, and we are all aware of, like what's perceived so many years ago, is that this depends a lot on people. So even though we may do process improvements a lot based on measurement and metrics and etc., we still have a lot of blur that is due to people engagement in software. And that's what I believe it will be the next step of investigation in this area. But regardless of that, sorry for my research curiosity. I think it's interesting that he dedicated the majority of his career to addressing these problems of software development. So he was a great man with a great career. He had 7 children actually, and I remember reading about the details of his life and what he did at the SEI, and he helped to build the CMMM and probably CMMI. He did, as you may know, 60 computer programs in order to test and refine the people software process, and then enlarge that to create the team software process. I met Jim Over personally in several CPG conferences and at the SEI, and it was incredible how he stepped back and went to work with what's on the people software process when he was already teaching it. So it's quite impressive, and they got such great results. So Humphrey was an SEI fellow, became an ACM fellow. He then got an honorary doctorate of software engineering, which is an amazing honor. And he was part of the editorial board of 2 major journals, and I may now by heart say named the Empirical Software Engineering Journal, which is quite important in terms of proving our results with the data. And he has is author of the 12 publications and 12 books that we all may know some of them or all of them. And in 1994, the IEEE Computer Society and the Software Engineering Institute decided to recognize his work by creating co-sponsoring an award to recognize the work of people that were giving out to society outstanding results and achievements in improving the way that software is created and evolved and achieves high quality. So regarding the nomination itself, has a voting member and other voting members have this role. We are here to actively support this process, okay? So here I am in talking with you, and hopefully since the session is being recorded to more people, soliciting for nominations, and we are here to help people to do their submissions, because it's quite an intricate process, not very straightforward. And then later on we'll be not being so helpful, because we'll be evaluating the packages and the packets and making sure that everything is submitted properly, but we'll help people who are almost there to achieve their goal and be nominated, and providing feedback for people that need to further work on their improvements, to submit on a following year. So we are not the enemies, we are friendly people. And I know already I knew already some of the people of the committee, so very good people, I can say. And so we'll also assist in interviewing the award finalists and help draft the review, because the SCI intends to have a very high quality report. As you know, the reports of the SCI are always quite good in quality and the contribution to the computer software society. So there will be a final report about this reward. So with what we have here as criteria to submit this kind of nomination is something very similar to what we need in a process improvement. Okay, so we have to have an improvement that is significant. So we have to demonstrate the impact on the process improvement itself, on the process areas that are affected, which processes are impacted, which metrics are changing and improving. It has to be measured, so we have to have data collected to guide work and demonstrate that this impact, and start with the goals that we want to achieve, decide which metrics we need to collect, and the factors that are involved here, and understand the cause-effect relationships, meaning which things did I change in my process affect the process in order to achieve a given result. For instance, reducing the number of defects or number of defects detected after delivering the software, as we already saw in some studies. The team software process is told as a process that allows you to get 0 defects after delivering the software to the companies that are buying it. So it has to be sustained. So we want to have, and this is something I always talk about when I'm doing strategic initiatives at my company, at my current company, which is we want to do something strategic. So we want to measure and be able to continuously receive feedback and do changes as we go and measure again and see if the changes are making a continuous profitable impact. So we keep going on this work. So it has to be sustained and shared. So you don't keep it these improvements to yourself. If you are working on a company or in a business unit, you have to show how you are impacting the entire organization or the rest of the organization. If you are working on an organization, you have to show how you impact the communities you're involved in, at forums like this one, or conferences, or to the scientific world as we are all scientists at the end of the day when we create something new. So this is it. So to be nominated, you can be nominated or self-nominated as an individual or in a group, a business unit of an organization, the organization as a whole, or you may be being nominated as a service provider of an organization. That's why I was talking about the work of Pato too, as one of the examples of the kind of people, the work that he's doing, and people that are also assisting people on implementing process improvements and evaluating process improvements. Sometimes they are helping them out on their decisions and selection of improvements. So they are providing a service that helps the other organization to improve, and they are eligible to be nominated for this award. So as I was saying, anyone may nominate, okay, the person or another person or another company. It has to be, you know, have the sponsorship of an executive, senior executive of the company that is not being nominated, and there must be a 2-page document to help us evaluate the submission quite fast. So in terms of this document, in terms of conditions, we cannot have confidential data on the nomination material. This is the 2 pages I talked about, and then there's a 10 pages attachment with the data sustaining the software improvement, with graphs, with data and information that help us understand how the rest of the company was coached and trained, stuff like that. So we may reach a point where we need additional data. So if necessary, then people will say that, okay, I'm providing this kind of data. Some of it is confidential, other is not. They will have a presentation. The person who wins the prize will do a presentation at the conference that will be designated for the effect. And as I told you before, publish an SEI technical report. And it may be necessary that a committee member visits the organization to be, you know, aware of what is being done. And there's a claim that is, if someone is required to go there, there will be a reimbursement by the recipient organization. So this is important to make sure everybody is aware of, to not be caught by surprise. If you have to give some additional information during that visit, this additional information is not returned by the subcommittee members. Of course, we respect the work of people, and while doing and preparing the technical report, all confidential data will be treated in such a way that makes a good report and not revealing things that should not be revealed. And this is the topics. I'm not going to go through all the things that need to be on the 2 pages submission material, because you read faster than I talk. And I think it's kind of self-explanatory. Okay, so one of the things that is talked about here is the point of contact for interactions on both organizations. This means if you have a target organization that you are helping to implement a process improvement, then your organization will also have to be, you have to have a representative in your organization and on the target organization in order to let us talk with them and have more details if we need for the evaluation. And the rest, I think it's quite straightforward. So in terms of times, we have this prize will be this reward will be given in 2023. So, and we know that process improvements take time, and people may have them in course, or maybe still need to collect some data and do some work. So the deadline for the nomination is the 1st of September. So I was quite in a rush and asked you guys gently to allow me to be here today and present the award as soon as possible, so to give time to people in the US start working on their submissions. And in the past I saw that you had people from other countries as well, so you would be a good place, good family to share this award with, for the visibility importance that it has. Then we begin to do the reviews, and if there are minor things that need to be changed, we'll provide and ask for additional information, and you have 1 week to provide that information, or we may suggest for future submission. The award recommendations in November will be submitted to the IEEE Computer Society and the Software Engineering Institute director of this area, so they can analyze our nominations. And then there will be an announcement in January 23 of the awarded people, and maybe more than one. There was a year that there were 2. And also other nominees will be notified as well, and understand what should be improved, what should get better, and not be left with just you were not accepted, which is something that no one likes to hear without a reason and without having the chance to learn. In spring, we will schedule the presentation at a conference, so talk with the award recipient in that sense. And between January and June, we'll be working on the SEI report to make sure that it will be available for everyone. So to wrap up this this award, I'm going to talk to you about the 2020 winner, who was Ajendra Prasad, and I'm sorry if I cannot spell it properly, as well as Vic said about my surname. And I have the link here for the technical report submitted to the SEI, and also a podcast that was recorded with him. And basically what he did was a 5-year journey of automation of process and development cycle in Accenture, which is quite a huge challenge. And this intelligent automation and the providers of technology assets that are intelligent as well, to allow a framework that has the practices and the technology to allow the organization to see their processes is quite big. And it's something that is a challenge. It's to implement a future-ready, mature-level automation throughout the software engineering life cycle at speed and scale. It's quite in line with my PhD research work, as I was also trying to do not the automation part, but the evaluation part in a quantitative manner, and not just saying if I'm compliant or not, but talking about benchmarking and stuff like that, which at the time with version 1.3 wasn't part of the tool. But I like to think that the help I gave to the Software Engineering Institute and the CMI Institute as well helped to evolve to the 2.0 version with the benchmarking we have today. And this automation is something that can help have a better human plus machine collaboration. And I normally say, and I talked about it in papers and probably in my PhD thesis as well, that the tools should be an extension of the human, so intuitive and what I'm seeing nowadays is also the automation of lots of processes and lots of tools that are not that hard to use in order to automate routine tasks and stuff like that. So I see a huge opportunity here to ensure that people are doing what they like and not doing something that a machine can do for them and routinely do for them. So as my final words, I would like to leave here before we start questioning, and is do what Humphrey always said. Never say I can't, say I can. So go for it. And it was hard to do all process improvements. Otherwise, we wouldn't still be inquiring and questioning and always trying to learn more and more each and every day until we don't no longer have the chance to do it. But while we can, we'll do it. Thank you very much. I'm available for questions and to help anyone who needs help on this process as well. Thank you.
And one thought that I had, this is Jim, that within the Twin Cities area, we have something called Code Freeze. Every couple of years, that brings together a bunch of really good speakers to talk about what they've been doing in the industry here. And while I couldn't recognize any one of those from Code Freeze, since I haven't been that many, maybe somebody else could find someone from Code Freeze that actually would be a good person to nominate from the cities here.
That would be nice. That would be wonderful if you have the contacts, or any of the members of the SPIN have the contacts. Please let them know we're working on this, and I have my email at the beginning of the presentation, so feel free to give it. And also, most of you have received my email as well. So yeah, that would be great. Any other questions that you may have?
Isabel, we will post your slides on the TwinSpin website.
Thank you.
And anybody
I'll
that,
share them with you.
anybody that in the audience today that has heard your presentation and know of someone or know of some organization you think may be appropriate to follow up on this, on the award, please, you can come through me and or contact Isabel directly. And one question I would have, it's possible for an individual to win this award, right?
Yes, it is. One individual may win this award. The criteria are just impacting other people's or other community or a community or the entire organization or another business unit. So one person alone may win the award. And it was the case of the 2020 winner, which was one person. He was a leader of an entire business unit. Probably didn't do it just by himself, but the ideas and the push and the move forward probably wasn't nominated. I'm not sure about the process because I wasn't part of this award by then. So this is my first year that I belong to the committee.
So please forward your slides to me.
Of course.
We'll get them posted on the TwinSpin website, and anybody that needs follow-up, you can either contact Isabel directly, or I'll help you get in contact with her, and we'll see what comes of this. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much for presenting, Isabel. Now we need to move on to Alex's panel. So Isabel,
I'm going to stop sharing, of
you need
course.
to stop sharing.
Let me see how I do this.
There.
Okay.
Okay, Alex, can you take over from there?
I will. Thank you, Dick. So welcome everybody to the March 3rd Twin Spin meeting. I'm your moderator, Alex Dietz. In February of 2001, at a two-day software development conference held at the Snowbird Ski Resort in Utah, the Agile Manifesto was conceived. It's a short 68 words. Let me read it. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value the following: individuals and interactions over process and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiations, responding to change over following a plan. And that is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. And so that short manifesto is now 21 years old, all grown up. And the questions we explore tonight have to do with how much has it changed from infancy to adulthood. Our four panelists come from across the software industry: Kelly Wyrock, Nicole Forsyth, Mike Studeman, and Tom Marble. And they are true Agilists. In our pre-meeting last week, Tom posed to me, Alex, what is your goal for this Twin Spin meeting, and how will we know it has been achieved? So I am absolutely delighted to have these four Agile coaches and consultants give their perspective on the evolving nature of Agile software development since the concepts were formally introduced 21 years ago. Now, the format for tonight's meeting is a moderated discussion. And so I would ask that audience members keep their microphones on mute for Zoom's sake. But to facilitate discussion, please type questions into the chat box. Every 15 or 20 minutes or so, or when there's a natural lull in the conversation, we will try to burn down the question backlog. And that way we'll keep the questions and topics together in a timely fashion with little lag. At the end of the meeting, we will open things up to general questions. So at this point, I would like to turn things over to our panelists. Each will give a brief intro and a short opening statement to frame their views. We'll start with Kelly and then move to Nicole, Mike, and finally Tom. So Kelly.
We starting off, we're getting our own short bio.
Yes.
Jump ahead. So my name is Kelly Wyrock. I'm now with my own consulting company, Agile Quality Systems. I've been doing that for just over 8 years now. And for 22 years before that, I was with the Medtronic organization in Minneapolis that made pacemakers and defibrillators. I was first exposed to Agile concepts before Agile was the word in the late 90s, when our product development organization was hearing from the leaders of Scrum and extreme programming and Lean, the variety of variants that were out there at the time. We're talking to Medtronic and a few of our advanced concepts group were exploring it. And then I was part of the transformation that brought Agile into our software organization in the early 2000s. Now in my consulting work, I do two things, but one half of what I do is Agile related training and coaching of teams, either on individual team-centered Agile mechanisms or the scaled Agile framework. I'm also the author of a guidance document called TAR 45, Guidance on the Use of Agile Methods for Medical Device Software, showing how Agile can be applied in the medical device regulated safety critical space. So for my opening statement, I want to address the topic in three different variants. What has not changed, and it's delightful that it hasn't. What has not changed, and it's unfortunate that it hasn't. And what has changed? So the first one, what has not changed? The Agile Manifesto, 21 years old, and it hasn't changed. Somebody told me a few years ago, that's constitution level stability. How many companies have a mission statement that lasts longer than 20 years? So the longevity of the principles and the concepts is interesting. Alex read just the first page, the value statements. The second page is the 12 principles. And I find it remarkable that those values and principles are still relevant today. And that's why I remarked on it. Okay, so what has not changed, and that's unfortunate. The struggles adopting Agile are still there, and blaming Agile for the struggles are still there. Agile is hard. It's always been hard. And I don't think it's gotten any easier in the last 20 some years. It's easy to do it wrong, and it's easy to blame the game for doing it wrong. I find it interesting to hear the echoes that have been going around for 20 years now of blaming Agile and Agile frameworks. In the early days when Scrum became dominant, it drew lots of criticisms from people not liking the Scrum framework. And then those same themes started to happen in the mid-2010s when the scaled Agile framework became the dominant scaling framework. There's criticisms all over the place of these frameworks. Do a quick search of bad Agile and you'll get a lot of hits. Try searching for safe is evil and you'll get hits even on that. It's really easy to blame agility for things or blame frameworks or criticize them. But every one of the stories that I've read or heard about or discussed, and I don't want to exaggerate I haven't taken a huge sample, but in dozens of articles and conversations, there's two common themes that I hear about the criticisms. One is, well, you're doing it wrong. No wonder you're getting a bad result. Or you don't understand what you're criticizing. This is especially true of the frameworks like Scrum and SAFe, that criticisms make statements about the frameworks that are just flat out not true. So where did you learn this? Where are you getting this criticism? So when people don't understand something really well, or they play the game badly, they blame Agile for that. Are any of you old enough to remember the Ron Jeffries article, "We Tried Baseball and It Didn't Work"? That he was drawing the metaphor of people are playing Scrum badly and then blaming Scrum for their bad results. And unfortunately, I think that hasn't changed. I did a quick search to remind myself, have the echoes died? And no, I still see articles from 2020, 2021, the same kind of criticisms that were around in the early 2000s. It's unfortunate that that's still around, that hasn't gone away. The one thing that has changed, it's good to see how Agile has grown beyond its early stages of IT software. When I first went to Agile conferences in the early 2000s, it was dominated by IT business application kind of software environments. And I wasn't in that world, I was in product development. It was good to see Agile grow beyond internal business applications into software products. And then growing beyond software in the late 2000s, Agile for hardware became a big buzz phrase and a big common topic at conferences. So it grew beyond software. And then it grew beyond just individual teams, but big teams building big complex systems. This is where the scaling frameworks became popular. And now one of the frameworks, the Scaled Agile framework, uses the term business agility, recognizing that it's not enough for software to be agile. It's not enough for product development to be agile. To get the real benefits out of agility, the whole business has to embrace the principles and the concepts. So if you tie that growth back to the original one, that the Agile Manifesto has been around for a long time, the concepts and the principles are sound, the benefits are well established, Agile's here to stay. Who's up next?
That's me. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
That was beautiful.
You're next. Go ahead.
I'll just hop in there. Since you told us our order, I figured I'd go. So I knew I was on deck to extend the baseball metaphor. So hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Forsyth, and I currently serve as the Director of Agile Coaching for Best Buy. Previously spent some time at Target. Before that, I was at a middleware software company, and then I have this glorious eclectic career before that, 10 years in nonprofit management. And then my academic days where I was a digital services librarian. So I was first exposed to Agile. I think I may be the relative newcomer of this group when the manifesto was about 10 years old. And I was a librarian in a big community college system, discovering I had an incredible passion for big system change because I could see that my library and our services weren't really meeting the needs of our students. had some friends who were starting a startup accelerator in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where I was living at the time. Actually, I was in Iowa City. So hello to any Iowa friends out there. And I took a class called Agile Beyond Software because I was frustrated at the lack of change within my system and the kind of lengths I had to go to get some pretty basic changes in my world. On tonight's topic about how the manifesto has, or how Agile has changed and grown, I'll give a rousing +1 to everything that Kelly said, and also put a little Best Buy spin on it. The Best Buy campus has on our walls some of our values and principles, one of which is that we strive to unleash the power of our people. And when I think about Agile and when I coach Agilists, and we actually have a team of 43 coaches, we've just expanded a little bit. So it's a very interesting time at Best Buy. When I think about unleashing the power of knowledge workers, I often ask and have people reflect on the question, who's getting to think in this situation? We're hiring, and will always be hiring, legions upon legions of engineers who are incredibly smart. They're incredibly talented, and given the right environment and trust, they are motivated to get the job done in all sorts of fascinating ways. But so often process prevents them from thinking. So our goal is to ask that question, hey, are we unleashing the power of our people? And in this big process and system, where's the thinking? Where's the discovering? Where's the sitting alongside customers and helping to enrich their lives through technology, which is the entire purpose of Best Buy as an organization. So I'll keep my comments short, but so looking forward to continuing this conversation tonight. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Nicole. Mike, you're up.
Thanks, Nicole. First of all, I want to thank Alex, Dick, and TwinSpin for having us here tonight. Looking forward to the conversation. So my name is Mike Studeman. I am an Agile coach and trainer with a company called Agility IRL, Agility in Real Life. It's a company that I co-founded with another gentleman by the name of Jim Ruprecht. We focus on taking Agile conceptually and making it real for folks through coaching and training. I came to Scrum and really more broadly Agile, not out of any sort of great sense for where product development was going. I came to Agile out of desperation. I was part of a team that was going to get fired, and rightfully so. We weren't adding any value to the business. So a couple of us got together and said, well, if we're going to go down, let's go down swinging. Let's try something different. So we decided to try this thing that was relatively new at the time called Scrum. And not only did we keep our jobs, which was a nice side effect, but we found a way to build really cool product in a short amount of time, all while establishing a work environment that candidly didn't suck. So I become very, very passionate about Agile as a philosophy, the frameworks that sit beneath it. I split my time between teaching classes in a variety of methods and helping coach clients in the real world. My background, a fairly diverse background, been a developer, been an analyst, been a project manager, been a functional manager in large organizations, been a functional manager of a very small organization. I think I'd give a hearty +1 to both Nicole and Kelly on what they said. I think, you know, my opening statement is really, I see as Agile reaches the legal drinking age, at least here in the United States, need to buy a beer. I really see a movement towards kind of reconnecting with why the manifesto was written, why those gentlemen, and unfortunately we're all gentlemen that gathered in Park City, wrote that statement. They were fundamentally trying to make life better for those building products. And I think, like a lot of movements, maybe we've lost a little bit of that as we've kind of grown up. And so I think as we look at the next 21 years of the Agile movement, that we might see a little bit of a return to, as Nicole said, figuring out who gets to think and really embracing those smart people that we hire. So looking forward to the discussion. Thanks again for the opportunity, and I'll turn it over to Tom.
Thanks, Mike. Tom Marvel.
Great. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Alex. I'm Tom Marble and happy to be here with TwinSpin. And, you know, be associated with the University of Minnesota. I am actually a University of Minnesota graduate in electrical engineering. Actually, Alex and Kathy on the call are my colleagues, and we were peers at the U of M. So it's like old home week for us to get together on the call. Oh yeah, Kathy's sporting the swag from U of M. All right, Kelly has some too. Awesome. So after I've got a long career, did a bunch of things, worked in Silicon Valley for a while. I worked in France. Actually have spent most of my career in software development. One of my exciting roles was at Sun Microsystems, where I was part of the core team that helped open source the Java programming language. And I was the first OpenJDK ambassador, community manager for Java. And now I'm with C Prime, and I am a strategic technical coach. So what does that mean? It means that I lead immersive learning experiences, or you might have heard of the dojo. And this is basically a learning experience to help make software teams better. So what has changed? What's different about Agile? I guess one observation, which is easy to make, is that there's a lot of variability in the way that Agile is implemented today. Some folks have really embraced it, and some have kind of embraced the ceremonies part of Agile, but are kind of resisting some of the more profound types of changes. We have all kinds of frameworks and habits and tools, and yet that variability persists, and that's part of the struggle I think that Kelly was alluding to. One of the things that I see a lot is that, Agile, written from the standpoint of developers and how we create code, isn't quite enough, because, Kelly, in talking about SAFe, mentions business agility. We need leadership buy-in. If we're going to change the way that we work and we deliver software, we need to be ready and supported by our leaders to do that. And that means organizational change, and it's hard. Nicole mentioned who's getting to think. And I think that's really an important part of Agile. Making teams better means empowering them to take chances, letting them experiment, letting them learn new things. And a lot of times what I see at big organizations is they are so worried about chaos that they've created standards organizations. They've driven for alignment. They have architecture review boards and corporate IT standards. And what that means is you don't have permission to do anything unless it fits into this mold. Well, how does that evolve? And how does that help empower teams to experiment and learn new things? Well, one of the things that I've experimented with, which has been kind of fun, is take an Agile process and let's squish the sprints down to micro sprints. How about 2.5 days? A sprint in 2.5 days. And what does that do? It forces you to think very quickly, basically do triage on what's most urgent and what's important, and squish those ceremonies down to just the minimal amount that is absolutely required, and then focus on trying stuff. I was lucky enough to present at Code Freeze earlier this year, and I see Sanjay is on, and I was presenting with Tanya Collar, one of my colleagues, a workshop. And the workshop was called Journey Mapping from the Perspective of the Developer as the Customer. So, when we do story writing, we often start with personas and a collaborative frame, and we try to write from the position of, as a user of the Best Buy website, I would like to do X, Y, Z. What about from the perspective of, as a software developer, this is my experience? And it was really a fun and interesting workshop. And kind of the idea is, we're not done. right? We're not going to sit on our laurels of 2001. We need to continue to challenge ourselves to think of this way that we create software, and maybe we can do it better. And I think that sharing and doing it together is really important. That's why I'm such an enthusiast for open source and free software. And it's been a lot of fun collaborating in those communities and now helping teams collaborate together and really help each other, boost each other up into thinking more. So that's me. Back to you, Alex.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So one thing I noticed from each of you when you were talking was about how Agile is hard. It takes effort. It's culture change. Were the original founders perhaps a bit naive in their expectations of what how hard this would be? I'll open it up.
I'll take a crack at that. I don't think so. And the longevity of the principles and the Agile Manifesto speak to this. Like, how many of you are in companies that have slogans and I try to call them core values or cultural behaviors. And when you read them, you think, well, aren't these things obvious? My favorite one at Medtronic was the core value of straight talk. Like, why do we have to remind people to be straight with what they say? And it's because it's inherently hard. Organizations drive that out of you. And I think the creators of the Agile Manifesto were all people. And I think they recognize the difficulty of people interacting within this big organism of a corporation. I don't think they thought it was going to be easy. I think they were recognizing how hard it is and putting principles in place to help us focus on areas to try to make it fit in a big corporation.
Kelly, Best Buy's got another one, which is be human, which I always laugh just a little tiny bit about because you don't have to do anything. But what I really love in that, and if I may be a little salty, I'm going to swear. So if y'all can just bear with me, I've long said my mission is to unfuck work. Like, work just can really suck for an awful lot of people. And every time I read the manifesto, and there's almost these little like cults who are like, oh, I'm the Alistair Coburn person with Heart of Agile, or, oh, I really, my coaches will get pictures with Dr. Sutherland and like put them, it's like a big deal. But I do think there's something incredibly sticky and powerful to what they were doing. I think where it runs into some just interesting things is traditional concepts of command and control. And I've really noticed since starting working at publicly traded companies, right, we're legally bound to deliver value to our shareholders. So I don't know, occasionally I think about what would it be like to go back out of publicly traded spaces where some of that fear and control might be loosed up a little bit. But I like to think they weren't naive. I like to think they were bold.
Yeah, I think they were bold as well. I think maybe what they underestimated is how much unlearning we had to do. You can make an argument that not only are you fighting a corporate culture and trying to adopt a more agile way of working, you can make an argument that at least in the West, you're fighting societal culture. I mean, think about it. What's the first thing you tell your kids when they go to school? Listen to the teacher. Do exactly what the teacher says. Right? And I mean, not to get too philosophical on a Thursday evening, but you can argue that most educational systems were set up to breed good factory workers, right? Reading, writing, arithmetic, you show up on time, you do what you're told, you're rewarded for getting the right answer. That, in my experience, software development is the exact opposite of that, right? We need to be creative. We need to think about how we're going to solve different problems. So I don't think that the gentlemen that wrote the manifesto were naive. I don't think that they realized how much they were fighting against as a countercultural force. I mean, Tom, you mentioned empowerment in your opening statement. Empowerment is a loaded word in most organizations. So oftentimes I use this definition to check whether people are truly empowered. And this isn't my definition, so don't attribute it to me. I picked it up somewhere along the journey. I wish I knew who gave it to me, but I give it to you. Empowerment means two things. One, not having to ask for permission to take action. And two, not having to apologize after having taken action. Now, when I give that to people, and we as software professionals, I think we hear it all the time. Oh, the team's empowered to do that. You're empowered to do that as a team member. As a developer, you're empowered to do this. And when I bring up that definition, oftentimes I hear, oh yeah, they're empowered. They just have to run it by me. No, you violated the definition. Or they'll say they're empowered, a developer will take action, and pretty soon that governance structure that Tom alluded to rears its ugly head, and they're like, well, they didn't get the 6 approvals that we need to do that. So then they're not empowered. So I'll turn it over to Tom, but I don't think they were naive. I just think that they maybe underestimated the challenge that they have and kind of that societal hangover, if you will, that continues to impact us to this day. Tom, your thoughts?
Well, what I like about the simplicity of the Agile Manifesto is it's realistic, and let's have compassion for how we got here. And especially for folks that aren't embedded in software like we are. It's understandable that, we started with this idea that we architect with blueprints and then we build a building. This is waterfall. It's sort of a natural thing that we came to that. And software is different. And there's probably a lot of things that make software different than building a building, but mainly it's the pace of change. I mean, if the materials are relatively stable and the zoning laws are relatively stable and the equipment is relatively stable, it's probably, well, we know it's successful to do a blueprint. But what's great about Agile is that it has this honesty, this compassion for the fact that we just don't know so many things. And what we're going to do is we're going to move forward acknowledging the uncertainty up front. And that's okay. I think that is the most powerful thing for me out of Agile. And I like Mike, your comment about empowerment, because this is why open source is so important to me. It's not that I can get tons of great software for free. I don't have to pay for it. It's that I can use it without asking for permission. That's my thought.
Any other thoughts?
Well, one other comment, and this came up, I think, in all of our introductions. Agile as a movement is 21 years old. Okay? Yet there still isn't agreement in a lot of organizations as to what we mean by Agile. So I apologize, I'm coming in out of the light and dark here because I'm in a hotel room. I'm actually doing something called an in-person training. I've never heard of this before. And the client that I'm working with today, they came in, and when we started, they said, oh yeah, we're Agile. And at the first break, an hour in, one of them grabbed me and they go, I don't think we're Agile anymore. In fact, I'm not even sure what Agile means here. And I thought it was a little bit of the cosmos giving me a little sign here tonight, knowing that I had this panel to say, there's still debates in a lot of organizations around what this word even means. And so I find I spend a lot of time in my work kind of bringing people back to the manifesto and saying, look, it's a philosophy, it's a mindset, it's a way of looking at the world. But if you're looking for a detailed playbook on how to do this, the manifesto is not for you. You've kind of lost the plot if you think that it's going to tell you how to deal with that uncertainty that Tom just alluded to.
So I'd like to take a question off the chat from Jim Plasek. That is, how does Agile work when your programmers are not equal? And this is something I've kind of questioned myself. So when we talk about who gets to think and the role of the manager in this, it's sometimes because the manager has to deal with the genius, with the competent people, and then the mediocre members of the team, and just trying to manage all of this and move forward. Agile says to that manager, no, let them just go off and do their own thing. So how does that work when your programmers just have this wide range of abilities and capabilities?
Can I challenge your last statement there? Does Agile tell managers, let team go off and do their own thing? I don't think it's that explicit. There is concepts of empowerment and holding teams, having teams empowered and accountable. Those words have to go together in my mind. And the self-organizing aspect, but what does self-organization mean? Does that just mean everybody just go do whatever they want? Well, I don't think it can mean that in any sort of business. I don't know any organization that takes it that way. But what can the team do determines how they can do it within their team, and maybe even get help from outside the team. To the example that Jim gives of an example of a genius on a team, if you assume that Agile says everybody on the team has to be able to do everything, well, that's clearly not reasonable. When you have a genius who's really good at something and you have a novice who's really bad at something, to expect the team to, well, either one could do something, that's not the right approach. It comes out, the team has to figure out how to apply that. How do we take advantage of the genius? How do we take advantage of the novice so that together as a team we're successful? And that particular piece about the different levels of skill set and experience, one of the roles of the genius is to raise the overall performance of the team. Not just to do everything because they're best at it, but to help everybody get better at it. Other thoughts?
Nicole, I saw you nodding there. I think this is
I just get so excited.
right in your area.
I could just talk for hours and hours. So I'll just maybe tell a quick story. I was kind of got my first real job in what I felt like was a grown-up software company. And it was me and 60 dudes, all dudes in the engineering department. And many of them had been programming in Java longer than I had been out of elementary school. And we had a hero on the team. And this hero is, to this day, a very close friend of mine. But he knew everything and he could do it all in moments. And, there was a point when I realized, looking at some of the data from our sprints, and we were running Scrum. And I hear some language here that might be conflating Agile and Scrum, when, of course, though they're often hand in hand, they're not the same thing. This man alone was responsible for 70 to 80% of the work that was coming out. He lived in England. We were a US-based company, and the man on Friday evenings was up working all the time. And I got to this point where I was like, bro, how many hours a week do you think you're working? Oh, I don't know. I don't really keep track. So I started keeping track for him. This man was pulling 80-hour weeks and other people weren't quite putting in 30. And we delved into this, and, he really enjoyed being a deep subject matter expert. He's still one of the foremost experts in the world on streaming technology. And the thing that we realized over time is that he was very desperately lonely in his professional work because no one was at his level, but he also had a tremendous gift for teaching that we had just never tapped. That whole company and the two teams around him, both our SaaS product and our installable software product, the moment we said, he doesn't get to do any more commits, he can approve pull requests, but he's not going to put it in. And we turned him and flipped him from being the lone hero who was carrying the entire company on his back to someone who is up-leveling others. It was tremendous. He was the type who never turned on his, we were remote long before COVID. He would never turn on his camera. He started turning on his camera. He started having way more fun when we got together in person. And just that entire company changed. The way they released software improved. Now, things over time maybe shifted a little bit. He was elevated to management and became a director for the first time in his career. And it just took shifting him out of hero mode and putting some constraints. And yeah, they were artificial constraints I imposed as a, kind of Scrum Mastery coach in that situation. And, I've certainly met kind of the hero developer who really enjoys and wants to kind of keep all that status for themselves. And this is one of those things where I think, Agile or Scrum, we can look at the values, the value of courage, the value to have courage enough to say, you know what, I actually think this isn't a great place for this man. And, everyone thought he was kind of a jerk because he knew all the answers. And I was like, well, he's actually a really nice guy. The more we talk to him, the more we get to know him. So I don't know. I have some pretty passionate feelings here. I'll say one more thing. When I think about Agile, and I think about things like human health, some of the most powerful and biggest advancements we've made in human health are incredibly simple things. Hand washing. Hand washing has absolutely revolutionized human health on every level. Just it is a step level, exponential, desperately important innovation. So I often ask my coaches, what is the hand washing of agility for you? Some people have, reasonable people sort of disagree. For me, it is often retrospective. The ability for a team to even remember, even in 2 weeks, to remember what they actually did. A ton of stuff happens in 2 weeks. So much stuff can happen in 2 weeks. We often can't even remember. To pause long enough to learn. And that's where I think hero developers can often, if they're willing to help share their knowledge and they're not incentivized to hoard their knowledge, where we can actually really get huge step level changes, because then also that person can go home and have dinner. He can have his Friday nights and go out with his British friends and see his daughter and all those wonderful, powerful things. So, very simple changes. They're small. They're not always easy to make, but can really make a difference. Start teaching your junior developers, improve those people. How much more loyal will they be when they show up at work every day to learn? And for me, learning is the hand washing of Agile. So I'm very passionate about this topic in particular.
Mike, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in, back to the question that Jim asked around the genius developer. I think you have to look at hero culture. I think you also have to remember the acronym WIFM. Everyone here heard of WIFM? What's in it for me? So you have to let those genius developers know that what's in it for them are a couple of things that Nicole highlighted. One, it's work-life balance. It's being able to take PTO. Unfortunately, in a lot of organizations, PTO doesn't stand for paid time off. It stands for pretend time off, because there's one person that knows how to build the app and knows how to deal with this, algorithm that nobody else knows. And so you have to say what's in it for you. You get real PTO. You also have the opportunity to grow in your own career, to no longer have to maintain the one thing that you've maintained for your entire career and go and do some of the new stuff, some of the fun stuff. I think the other piece that Nicole, you touched on, that gets to Jim's question, and this actually ties back to something Kelly said earlier about changing the organization, is you have to look at incentive structures. All Agile frameworks advocate some form of team, and we have to change the incentive structures such that we win as a team, we lose as a team. Okay? That it's not back to, the hero culture and I get a bigger bonus than you. Moreover, just changing the incentive structure, you also have to let the geniuses on the teams know that has the senior person, has the genius, that they're expected to be a teacher, that's part of being a professional. Go back to the trades where you have a master, a journey person, and an apprentice. It's the master's responsibility to bring the journey person along and bring the apprentice along. And for whatever reason, we've maybe not adopted that mentality always in the software space. And I think we could learn a lot from that.
And so much of this is my favorite phrase of it depends. It depends on the context. It depends on the team. It depends on the personality on those teams. If a team has a genius, then the team has to figure out how to work with a genius on the team. Do we always let the genius do the genius things, or do we want the genius to coach others? Does it depend on the thing? Does it depend on the sprint? Does it depend on the deadline? All of this stuff needs to be worked out within the team, recognizing that everybody brings different things to the team. I love using the sports metaphor. Some sports, there's very clear specialization, football being, I think, the most obvious, that a lineman is not going to be a wide receiver until you run a trick play where the lineman catches a touchdown pass. So, and wide receivers aren't supposed to block unless they're trying to block for running back, trying to get an 80-yard running play. So there's specialization to be sure, but we act as a team and we recognize what are the skill sets on those teams and how do we take the best advantage of that. And that includes being open and honest to say, I do like being the hero. That is what motivates me. Okay, how can we find a way that we feed that desire for yours and yet still be a team?
I want to say just a couple words, and I know we have lots of questions to get to, so I'll try to be quick. Put on your engineering manager hat for a second. Do you really want your team to be equal? What if you had a third that were junior, a third that were mid, and a third that were senior? That would mean 2/3 get to grow, 2/3 get to be mentors, right? It's a red hot job market. We need to grow our people. We need to keep them motivated. So that's one. Then what if we cared just a little bit less about Fibonacci story points? What if we didn't care about t-shirt sizes? And the reason we don't care is we're so good at story splitting. They're so small, it just doesn't matter. What we're going to do is we're going to take the junior, the mid, and the seniors all in a mob or an ensemble to program. Everybody's going to see what's going on. We're going to get frequent small commits. We're not going to get a pull request with 37 files touched, 3,700 deltas, and now everybody's got to go back to their desk and get a tall latte and see what in the heck was going on, right? You're going to tell me now the velocity of the team is the velocity of the most junior developer. I don't think that's true. But even if it were, that velocity you could count on, because any movement that would happen would increase that velocity if you had a little bit more of a balance of the mid or the senior developers in there.
And I
So-
guarantee you, when my English friend occasionally went on PTO, the predictability of that team, and I really hate velocity, and I could rant about that another time, but it went in the crapper. It's a single point of failure. You just can't have predictability with a single person, right? It's unsafe, I think, to lean on the genius too much, to the comment about predictability.
I love pretend time off. I don't want that. Alex, what's our next question?
Well, I was going to pose to you, this sounds like something that the mentoring and nurturing of junior people by the senior folks, it sounds like something that Agile has picked up and learned in growing up. That this really is something that's necessary for a well-functioning team that probably wasn't as well spelled out earlier.
I don't think I quite agree with that, because that's one of the things that attracted me to Agile early on, was the fact that it was a team game. And that's really what we needed at the time Agile came into our organization. Is we had a lot of really good people, but the more complicated our system got, the bigger we got as an organization, the more we had to act like a team. And so the elements of Agile being a team philosophy, I think, have been there from the beginning. Maybe some of the specifics, one of the common myths early on was Agile says everybody has to be a jack of all trades. Everybody has to be able to do everything. Where did you hear that? I think that was a wrong interpretation of the self-organizing teams principle. But I think they recognize that the essence of a team game meant people had to work these things out. They didn't give a lot of prescription in their early frameworks. That's certainly true. I think the concept of Agile being team-oriented has been one of the things that's making it successful even today.
I think, Alex, your question shows maybe some growth in what, and I agree, Kelly, that it's always been a team game. But I think a lot of us, when we're first exposed to the manifesto and first exposed to frameworks, we don't really understand what we mean by team. I think team's kind of an abused word in a lot of organizations. I think the word team and group gets interchanged. Right? And unfortunately, a lot of us are told we're in teams, notice the air quotes, when we're really in groups. Right? A group does related work, but a group doesn't have a common goal. A group isn't willing to sacrifice of their individual goals to achieve the common goal. Right? A group is easily turned in on itself by a crisis, whether that be a really hard deadline, a new technology, whatnot. A team says, yeah, we have these other things coming at us, but those things aren't going to hurt us. Right? We're going to actually emerge from this moving forward. And so to the question, and Kelly, to your response, I think a lot of us are starting to wake up and go, when we say team, we mean win and die, win and lose as a team, live and die as a team. And it's no longer about, I'm going to use a baseball analogy versus football, but it's no longer about my individual batting average or how many fielding plays I made today. It's about, did we win or not? And unfortunately, I still run into people that are like, but I wrote really elegant code. Yeah, I don't care. And they'll be like, well, why don't you care? You haven't even looked at it. I'm like, because your customer doesn't care, your user doesn't care. Well, Mike, but it does. I'm sure it's very elegant, and over a beer, you can walk me through it, and I'll be very impressed and jealous that you were able to do that. But we don't care unless that code meets the needs of a user. Yeah, it meets a quality level. We can maintain it, we can support it, we can extend it. So I think there's a little bit of confusion, around this team concept. I see, Nicole, you put something out in the chat. You're really good at doing that, by the way. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just can't
No,
help
your
myself.
thoughts on it.
I've been remote for too long, and we always do this kind of multi-threading thing. And I did part of my graduate work remote, so I just can't help myself. But the work of J. Richard Hackman, I think, is really important, and the Patrick Lencioni's of the world, 5 dysfunctions of a team, and the things like that, I think really inform. And at Best Buy, we've distilled this down. Now, some of this is very specific to our environment, and props to our Canadian analogs who really codified these 4 rules. Teams have to have purposes, and they live and die by those purposes. And that's what binds them together. All the skills have to be present on the team. We all know that to be cross-functionality, but that's such an abused word. I don't even think people remember what functions are sometimes in a business job function sense. Your access to those skills has to be as close to real time as possible. Your UX designer can't be on 74,000 other projects, and you'll never hear from her when you need her or him. Everyone on the team is needed. This is what I call the little red hen rule. When you have someone on the team who maybe was real helpful at first, and then maybe you don't need them as much, maybe they helped you set up environments or kicked you off. As soon as that person isn't contributing, everyone else on the team gets like, oh, well, yeah, I guess Jerry earned his stripes, but he's not really doing anything. Why should I work so hard? So we actually use everyone is needed as a very elegant way to thank people and say, hey, we thank you so much for being on the team. It was great. You're moving on to other pastures, because ending teams and shifting teams is inherently incredibly difficult for people. And so that's where rule 3 comes in. And then the 4th one, when I used to teach the principles to the manifesto, I always said there was a 13th one. And the 13th principle is we over me. And we win and lose as a team is not only how we behave internally, but how people outside. So anytime you incentivize an individual and not the whole team, everyone else on the team is like, well, I've been busting my ass for months to get this out the door, and the product manager just got all the credit. Like, why do I do this? Right? It's so demotivating for people. So when I coach leaders, I say, hey, we've got to incentivize this group as a team, because the enabling structures we have an organization give the team will make or break it, and it happens in a nanosecond. Like, it just happens in an instant. So if those are helpful to you, feel free to use them, but all of my coaches can recite it verbatim, and we coach very specifically to it when we do org design.
Okay, I want to bring one thing off the question backlog regarding teams, and then I want to move on to talking about management buy-in, because we've had a number of observations there in the chat box. But this is from Steve Gross. I spent 9 years at Google where we never did sprints, never did daily stand-ups, and at the same time, we built great software and grew enormously. Is it possible that sprints and stand-ups are not all they're cracked up to be? Thoughts?
Yeah, I'll start this one off. Yes. I mean, sprints so sprint comes from Scrum, daily stand-up comes from extreme programming, daily Scrum and Scrum. You can build great software without using any framework. You can adopt an agile philosophy without adopting any framework. The challenge I think that most organizations have is culturally, they don't have the discipline built in that the frameworks provide. So frameworks are good spot to start to kind of get into that habit. So, and I oftentimes have to tell our clients, look, it's not about the daily scrum. It's not about doing a sprint. It's about producing valuable software that people want to use. And if you can do that without using any of the framework, let me know how I can buy into your company.
I love that one, and because you can insert any Agile, Scrum, safe practice for sprint and stand-up, and it's always the same answer. It depends on what problem it's helping you solve. It depends on what it's helping you get better at. If you are constantly wasting time because of multitasking, because everybody's got 10 things to do in a day and they're always switching tasks, daily stand-ups will help you get rid of that. If you can't get anything done in 2 weeks, you got lots of things in progress, but nothing's ever getting completed, sprints are a wonderful solution to that. Nothing like a deadline to force things to happen. But if you don't have those problems, those mechanisms might not be all that useful to you. So that's true of any mechanism. This is the criticism I hear about the Scaled Agile framework. This thing, it puts this burden in the way. And I'm like, well, no, it actually solves a problem for me. So, and who's right? The answer is we're both right. If I have a problem, this mechanism sounds like a good thing to solve it. If I don't have the problem, why would I pick that mechanism? And so you'd really need to understand the framework. And to Mike's point, most organizations aren't mature enough to think of it as a smorgasbord. Let's just pick things. The framework is a framework for a reason. And if you can grow beyond that framework, you grow from an apprentice to a journeyman to a master. Masters don't want frameworks. Apprentices have to have them. They can't operate any other way. And so where's your organization? It'll determine whether the frameworks are helpful for you or not.
Before I turn it over to the other two panelists, though, I got to bring your point back, Kelly, to something Nicole said earlier. Choosing what works for you out of those frameworks requires that you think, which brings us back to Nicole, to your question of who gets to think. So I thought it was a good lead in to maybe, Nicole, your comments on this topic.
Yeah, it sounds to me like, and I think we can acknowledge that there are some unicorns, and there's a book from the Progradic. I'm a librarian by training, so I can't help with the book stuff. Agilists are always lousy with books anyway, but it's called Competing with Unicorns. Best Buy, to pick on both Best Buy and Target, they are merchandising big box retailers that existed long before the internet, right? 46 for Target and was it 65 for Best Buy? You can't burn what we had all the way to the ground and rebuild it like Google was born digital. Scrum is like a set of braces. Scrum is a place to start. It's not the place to end. And anytime I see like a mature Agile team, and much love, some new coach comes in and says, well, you're not doing the daily Scrum right, I pull them right back, because I'm like, you're forcing them into I don't often use the word mature, but a less mature state. They've actually figured out a way to do it without the daily Scrum. The daily Scrum is a scaffold. The framework is a scaffold. That building is built. It looks great. Take the scaffolding away. The scaffolding is just ugly and not helping. And that, I think, is a fundamental thing that we missed when we started adopting Agile. And when I think a lot of us realized a whole lot of money could be made in Agile consulting, is we forgot that the scaffolding often can come down. I had the pleasure of working with a very young UX designer, so talented. She only ever knew an Agile way of working. And when she went to more established companies, she was like, this is horrible. Like, why can't I do my job? This is awful. And I was like, you were kind of born digital, you don't know. But for the rest of us who have to we're in the kind of rehab business of like, okay, let's take these not digital places. So yeah, I don't think any of the practices are sacred, but the concepts and the values and the enabling constraints that are the values and the principles, whether we call them Agile or nimbility or whatever new word will come next, those are for sure evergreen. As humans, we need something to hold on to, and we can visibly see the word daily stand-up, daily Scrum, backlog refinement. And I do think one thing we haven't mentioned is the Scrum Guide. The Scrum Guide has changed, right? They changed a whole bunch of things in 2020. Scrum being a very specific framework, obviously SAFe is evolving all the time and has the numbers after it and things like that. So it's worth noting these things do change and shift, but they're a place to start. They're not a place to end.
I'll just reiterate that I think that sprinkling some ceremonies in your process is not going to make it taste better. I heard an interesting thing from a colleague the other day. Bashing safe or scaled agility is kind of in fashion, but somebody else made a comment. They said, well, for a lot of organizations that are struggling, safe might be a big improvement. And I think that if we boiled it right down to the core, I think what I like to think of as the loop: plan, do, share, reflect. And I don't know if that was the secret, Stefan, at Google, but and there's a lot of ways to work, but that's kind of the most important thing that I think of. And otherwise, I'd say, yeah, ceremonies are not the high order bit.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'd like to move on a little bit to talk about buy-in. We've talked about this a little bit, but one question came up from Sue. At what level does executive buy-in need to occur? Does the CEO of a mid to large scale organization have to be versed in Agile? They want to enable the teams to move forward. They don't care about the how, they're looking for the outcome. I see teams get hung up on this point rather than just trying to change the culture for the outcome.
I want to jump on that one. One of my favorite stories, that I was a skeptic of Agile at the beginning. I said that our organization started in the late 90s. I didn't buy in until 2002. And one of the things we heard from these leaders coming in, all the big names at the time were coming and giving speeches and talking about these methods. And we heard from every one of them, for Agile to work, you have to have senior management active engagement. The CEO on down has to understand it and apply it. And one of my skeptical responses was, there is no way in the world Bill George, CEO of Medtronic, is going to give a rip about whether we're using Agile or otherwise. He's simply not going to care. I dismissed that advice. Fast forward 10 years, they were right. Maybe not literally Bill George level, but the need to have senior management active engagement was critical. Agile did really well at Medtronic for a while in my organization. At one point, we were still organized around projects. We were on a project that we thought we were rock stars. We had changed the world of how we were doing software. And what happened when that project was over? Management distributed all those people to different projects, didn't keep going the same concepts. And at the same time, we were reorging. Medtronic was going through a difficult time. We reorged, brought in new management who had a disdain for Agile. So guess what happened? It retreated because there was no champion, there was nobody buying into the benefit, there was nobody asking for it, and it retreated for a while. They were right. Senior management owns and is responsible for the overall direction of an organization. And if they decide, you know what, I'm just not too interested in Agile anymore, it's going to die. If they don't understand why we're doing this, they're not going to be bought into it. They need to be an active participant, not just a, yeah, go do this Agile thing that I've heard much about. They have to actively participate. Now, where that is in the organization depends on where your Agile bubble is. I don't know any organization that's Agile entirely. Agile is always a bubble within an organization that is not. So you have to have the right level around the bubble to protect it and to help it grow. Thanks for letting me tell my story there.
Nicole, maybe you could talk about your time at Target and how that was influenced by this.
Oh, sure. I do have to drop in a link to shamelessly self-promote, and not self-promotion for me, but my associate director of coaching is this young Canadian man named Kent Brown. And he did a talk at Agile 2021, and the title's just so good, if nothing else. Leadership Evolution Structure, How to Trick Every Leader into Being Agilists. So if you want to look at that right up, and if you a little more Googling, his 30-minute talk is out on YouTube. Essentially, the thing that he's found in Best Buy Canada, and we're experimenting with like mad, is a lot of leaders, just given kind of the time and how old the manifesto is, have never actually been on an Agile team. They don't have they just don't always know, but they're desperately important. So helping leaders to actually form leadership teams, a lot of C-suite leadership teams I see actually acting like teams. This is a way to help leaders, once they've actually been on a team, they get it. And then you don't have to be the lone champion or your organization of coaches isn't only the champions, because leaders can start to feel it. So I'll pass that on. Target is such an interesting case. When I came into Target, the dojo had been a thing. There had been about a 10-year history of agility, and it grew from two roots. And I know this because we did an intensive story mapping project and we visually drew it out on a giant wall in the dojo. As Target and mobile technology evolved, they were like, hey, what do we do with this? I don't know if anyone remembers, but the first Target mobile app was a snow globe. You shook it and it gave you some, $5 off toothpaste or something like that. It was a novelty. But as mobile started to mature and people were like, oh boy, we can sell things on it. My current boss at Best Buy and the mobile team started being very agile. And I'll say in every big not born digital company I've been near or around, mobile was often the first agility movement that came in. A few years later, the IT department at Target needed to deploy servers more quickly. It was taking a long time, and we're talking weeks, right? And this was clearly not acceptable. So a leader who's now at US Bank and several people who you will all probably know and recognize as having written some awesome papers on Target, sat down, got everybody to work in a conference room together to figure out how they could deploy, how they could just allow teams to self-serve. And of course, now we can spin things up in mere seconds. So those two paths to agility led to a couple very powerful things happening. Mike McNamara coming in as the CTO for Target, and he said, we're not going to be a project. We had, I think it was something, Target tells a very polished story about this, like 800 projects going. It was unmanageable, it was unknowable, and it was undiscernible. And he said, nope, we're turning this into a product organization. We're going to have like in retail, there's always going to be people who need to know a lot about returns. There's always going to be people who need to know about how to get you to discover things, right? The shopping journey is not that different for any retailer. We're going to flip to a product model, and they did some pretty drastic things. They got rid of the architecture review board. They took a bunch of project managers and said, do you think you want to do product or Scrum? That's your new job. No, I wasn't there for it, but I hear some of the training maybe wasn't great. And then the dojo was born. This centralized physical place and set of services that could really, from my personal, when I came in, we were really good and we optimized for training Scrum. Now, by the time I came along, I think Scrum had matured, and I think the constraint had moved. The constraint was not Scrum is new, nobody knows how to do it, we're project-based. The constraint shifted to things like we need to discover from our customers more nimbly. And Target is exceptional at that, right? We go physically into stores and work with people. And so it's been a very interesting ride at Target to figure out, oh, now we're not just about being a Scrum training ground. And so it's been interesting. The dojo is now called Team Rise, and they, akin to what we do at Best Buy, really the product that these coaching organizations make is teams. My area of expertise is making teams. And I think we do really well as Agile coaches when we remember that we're here to make teams, not just development teams that make software, but teams of leaders that enable and do what I can't remember which principle it is, maybe number 5, find motivated people, trust them to get the job done, give them the environment they need. And really at the end of the day, the product of leadership is that environment by which the smart people can think in. So Target has done some really fabulous things in the Twin Cities, I think, as far as agility is concerned, but it was rough. One of the things that Target doesn't always tell in the polished story of the dojo is there were a lot of hard times. It didn't work out very well for a lot of people. And there's lots of things that Target does that we could all still probably argue are not particularly agile. One of the great stories I think that came out of that is the story of Drive Up. Target did Drive Up in the most agile manner I've ever seen. A small group of very talented, bright, motivated people was given air cover by McNamara, and he said, make this a reality. And within 4 weeks, they had a prototype, and they scaled it every 2 weeks thereon. And they went from problem to problem to problem. They tested a lot of hypotheses. They threw a lot of stuff in the garbage bin, and I think they were really recognized for being leaders in that space. So, I could talk about the dojo for years. Maybe Target doesn't want me to, but it was a great experiment, and I love seeing how it's kind of grown and replicated and taken root in all the different forms it can across companies, across at least the States and probably internationally. So quick story there. I know we're coming close to the end of our time here, but it's interesting.
Yeah, actually, a question for Dick. How much time do we have? We typically end at 8.
We can go a little beyond. It depends on how everybody wants to hang in here. We normally end at 8. Why don't we set the end at 8:15? If people want to hang in there that long.
Thank you, Dick. Very agile of you.
Yeah, right.
Well,
See if we have some other-
I was just gonna add on, if I could, Alex, to the last question around leadership. I don't think leaders at the CEO level need to know how to conduct a good daily scrum. I think that's a mistake a lot of organizations make. But I do think that a leader needs to know how to condition the soil. Okay, so seeds are being planted with these teams that Nicole is helping us create. A good leader needs to understand, how do I increase focus in the organization? How do I keep teams together longer? How do I limit my work in process at an organizational level? How do I create incentive structures that encourage people to work as teams, not as individuals? How do I look at how I fund product development? And do my funding mechanisms encourage long-lived teams? Do they encourage a holistic view of not just creating the product, but actually maintaining it and having those that created it own their quality moving forward? So I think it comes down at a leadership level to looking at that cultural soil and whether that's conditioned right, so that when the seeds of Agile are thrown, they have a chance to germinate. I think, to a point Kelly made earlier, a lot of the reasons that organizations struggle is they'll get good seed, they'll get a good effort, a good pilot effort, but it's planted on cement. And once that pilot team goes away, there's just nothing there to further bear fruit.
Let's see if we have some other questions in the backlog. We have a question from Kathy. For those who consult or coach teams to improve outcomes, how often are poor processes the problem, and how often are people the problem? When two in particular don't get along, better to separate from the team, or is there a way to correct that?
I also like this one. I had this discussion many times in my Medtronic days. The simple answer is, it's always a people problem, because people created the process. People define the process. They decide how to execute the process. And indeed, that's the Agile model, is the team should own their process. So, and I can say this because half of my job is process work. That's the other thing I do in my consulting work. I'm in the medical device space, is called a quality management system, the processes we have to follow. First of all, regulators say you have to have such a system, but more importantly, it's good for us. Processes are good. They should help us produce good quality software, but we make the process. Nobody's telling you what your process has to be. We pick that. So it always comes down to the people. I'm not sure I understood the second part of that question, so I want to answer that piece of it.
Well, let me just chime in and say, I think psychological safety is probably the most important thing here. And, you know, the problems that we have are all people problems. They're not technical problems. It's all people problems. Basically, you know, I have coach in my title, but I'm really practicing psychology without a license. I mean, I'll be honest, that's really what I do a lot. And so it's all about people.
I love it when people say that. You're actually sounding like our therapist. Yep, that's exactly what I am.
Well, Kelly, tell me more about how you feel about that.
We try to keep it at hairdresser level, is how we occasionally will address sort of the armchair psychology.
Oh, much better. I love that one.
Yeah. It's I think especially in this era of COVID, said with just much love and much respect, and so much mental health, I think has really come into our awareness in the COVID era, right? A lot of people have really been suffering. And so I think that's where, as a coaching team, right, again, 43 people, lots of people come to us with a lot of things. That's a way that I think helps us to set some kind of healthy boundaries around that question. But it is often so intimately about people. Now, process, I always think that process in some ways is kind of like history, right? My dad was a great Civil War buff and historian, and he passed that on to me, even though people often find that very funny. And history really walks with us, and process is one way in organizational life that history can walk with us. And I was struggling to find the studies, but people generally are very good at adding things, but very, very seldom are we good at getting rid of things. Like, my dad is from a North Iowa farm family. All those buildings on the farm are full of stuff. It's real hard to get rid of stuff. And in knowledge work, it's real hard to get rid of process and history, and all systems tend toward chaos and over detailed. And sometimes we just declare process bankruptcy and we start building it again. Sometimes we declare backlog bankruptcy and we just start building it again because it's just too hard to pick away at it. And then, of course, the good old fashioned two people who maybe just simply can't work together. That's where some of the mediation, conflict resolution, and just good old fashioned management, like, yep, you know what, these two probably need to separate, or maybe the conflict is caused by a process. How could we change that?
Yeah, I don't think I have a lot to add other than saying, when you have two people that aren't getting along, I think there's this misconception that if we just adopt Scrum or we just adopt extreme programming, we're all going to get along. This isn't rainbows and unicorns and duckies and bunnies, folks. This is fierce collaboration. And you have to come into it with, I don't have to necessarily like the people that I work with, but I do have to respect them. And that's part of being a professional. And once again, getting way too philosophical, I probably should have only had 2 or 3 Bloody Marys before the panel. But I think we've lost that in society, just the ability to say, hey, look, I vehemently disagree with this approach, Tom, but I respect you as a person and I'm willing to hear you out as to why you think this is the best way to go without making it personal. Some of the best teams that I've been on as a developer, where we could have fierce technical conversations and then go laugh about it over a beer, hopefully multiple beers. So I think it's just this idea that, not everyone's going to get along. You do have to be respectful, and take those issues to the team. Oftentimes the team knows that 2 people aren't getting along. The team are in some ways victims of that, and take it to the team and go, hey, is it better if we live apart? If we go on and be parts of different teams, or is there a way to work together, and maybe we're not the best of friends, but we respect each other's knowledge and view of the world?
Along those lines, one of the questions I've had is, what do you do when you come into an organization that's been told we will adopt Agile by somebody up above, and they are professionally traumatized by the kinds of projects they've had to go through? They don't trust each other, and they don't trust management.
Those are the discussions that come up. I'm usually brought into an organization when they're looking for initial training. They've already made a decision and they're going to training. But one of the things that comes out right away is, why are you doing this? Why are you in this session? I used to even ask that question until it got too uncomfortable. I stopped asking it, because sometimes the answer is because somebody told me, or I don't know why, and that puts people on the spot. But that's very illustrative of, is this a strategic choice? Is there good reasons behind it? Do people buy into it? I don't see as much cynicism as I used to see in my early years of consulting. I saw a lot of, yeah, I have to be here, but this will go away kind of thing. I don't see that as often anymore. But what I do see is the case for agility has not been made. Somebody is proclaiming it. There's maybe a little bit of story, but I say, has it ever been articulated what you're trying to get better at? Why do you think Agile will help you? And how will you know? I almost never hear distinct answers to those three. And the companion piece of that is some senior people asking for Agile. Do they know what they're asking for when they said that? I don't think so.
It's like the old Princess Bride movie, which I love and adore. You keep saying that word. It does not mean what I think it means.
I use that one all the time. I love that line.
It's a real blessing. You know, I think in this panel, and maybe a teensy, well, no, I'm not unique here. You know, I've made some choices to work inside of organizations. Now, beyond the fact that I grew up in an entrepreneurial household and I have a young son and really value a steady income, one of the things that I think is kind of a superpower of a consultant is the ability to speak truth to power. You can say very clean and clear to executives things sometimes that it's a little more difficult to say inside. But I do know many of my consulting colleagues and friends, and I'm so excited to have met this group, often walk away from the org and they're like, did I make any change? Did it stick? Did it stay around for a while? And I think for me, that's been one of the grand experiments with Best Buy. And hats off to Best Buy for being willing to take an experimental stance. How do we build this in for the long term? How do we help those roots really go deep and like be part of the soil rather than that built on concrete? I'm a gardener, so Mike, I really loved that analogy. How do we build, I sent out that video by Captain David Marquet, and he defines leadership as embedding the capacity for greatness in the organization. And at Best Buy, it's like, how do I help Best Buy be resilient? Super highly competitive marketplace, last standing big electronics retailer. Like, we're in a tough spot at a tough time. How do I help the organization stay resilient and all the people? So we talk a lot about building a movement inside the organization. And we use a lot of the language of community organizing and good old fashioned movement building. Because I do think it's a really interesting, and we use consultants a lot, right? We have this gentleman, John Smart, come in and talk to us. We bring in this group called Humanizing Work from time to time. But it is really interesting to think about how do you really change the structure of an organization? Because we build the structures and then the structures build us, right? So yeah, those are some of the things I'm interested in working inside an organization.
Yeah, this is kind of a riff. This is kind of a riff off your question, Alex, but one of my favorite questions that I get asked as a coach and a trainer is, can you come in and help us define our standard Agile approach? And I'm like, bad juju there. And that shows me that we have to actually unlearn some stuff before we even start the journey. It's impossible to have a standard approach to a philosophy like Agile. The other big thing, and this goes to something, Kelly, that you said around, and I've learned this being the parent of 3 teenage boys, our ability collectively as human beings to force another human being to do something they don't want to do is incredibly poor. Meaning I can tell my boys, and they're good boys, I can tell them what to do, but the second I turn my back, if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. Right? That's part of human nature. So how does this relate to this question? You have to work with the willing. You can't come into an organization and say, I'm going to make Dan, Sanjay, Kathy, and Dick, I'm going to make you 4 Agile, and you will like it. Because it ends up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. Just by the very premise, those 4 are going to go, well, wait a second, Studeman, what are you doing here? So you have to work with the willing. You can't force this or shove this down someone's throat in any way.
Question from our backlog is from Dan. What aspects of Agile change or shift depending on the mix of hardware and software in a product? I was thinking this myself. Very little of what we've talked about tonight is specific to hardware. We've talked about human interaction and behavior and team building. how well does Agile work beyond software teams?
I have a fair amount of experience with that now, since most of my medical device clients are not just software. They're software interacting with hardware and systems. And the simple answer is most of it applies. The one key difference is hardware and physical systems often have inherent linearity of things that have to be done in a certain order. But even that's changing. I heard a great quote 2 years ago at a SAFE summit, is a guy who's a Agile systems guy, saying that we got to remember that the software world has a 2-decade head start on how to do incremental development. Software is inherently easier to do incrementally. We've built mechanisms to support it, but hardware is catching up. You don't have to do linear development of the old about do a drawing, make a mold, crank out some parts, test it. You can do a lot of things with simulations, modeling. You can turn circuit boards in a day now. It used to take weeks to get a new circuit board. So it's the hardware world is getting better at doing things incrementally, but there are some things that are very linear. And back to the mechanical example, the lean principle of make decisions at the last responsible moment really applies in hardware. Once you decide to make a mold, if you change the design of that part, it's going to cost a lot of money to do the mold over again. So you got to do things to figure out how can I put off that decision as long as possible? But once I decide, the cost of change goes up. That isn't often as true in software. It's certainly not unique to hardware. It's just often bigger in hardware. This cost of change gets more expensive when you've crossed certain boundaries. But again, that's changing. The hardware world is catching up.
As an electrical engineer, I do software a lot, but many of my colleagues do hardware, and they kind of tease me about how hardware is easy, software is hard. And they give examples like, old rocket systems for which the source code has long been lost, and they have some executable. And so they can like recreate hardware to run this thing, but they can't, get back to the source code, or silly examples like that. And it's just funny sometimes to hear hardware engineers talk about how software is rigid. I mean, think about the lifetime of our software projects. I mean, Mike, has the code you wrote 20 years ago, is it still running today?
Oh yeah. I won't tell you where it's running because I think it impacts some people on the call. I actually wrote part of the income tax processing system for the state of Minnesota. You're welcome.
Nice.
You're welcome.
Wow.
Every year at this time, I get very, very nervous. I mean, to the question, Dan, to build off of Kelly's answer a little bit, and this is how I think Agile has matured. 10 years ago, the response was, we're doing hardware, we can't do this. Now it's, we have a hardware product, we can do this, we still have some limitations imposed by physics, but even those are getting better. So I see a lot of growth in that space moving forward. As Kelly said, 20 years behind, we could debate that over an adult beverage sometime, but the hardware space is catching up.
I have no experience in hardware. So, but the one thing I'll pull in from my days in the library world, I mean, as an institution, the library has just been through the ringer, right? The rise of the internet, like, hey, we don't need your books anymore. And, how much time did I spend writing papers on things like Google Books? But I had a very wise professor whose area of specialty was library buildings. And in buildings, and I was quickly Googling for the paper, but I can't find it. There's this concept around designing for obsolescence. What you're using this building for today will change. The Library of Congress, 2 of those buildings were built with the book stacks. They're physically the structure of the building. Not a lot you can change in those buildings, but how might we do things like design knowing we don't know what the space is going to be used for in 5 years? So what do? We put lots of power outlets here. We put false flooring. We make it so we know the space can adapt and change. And I've just always been so interested. Right now, the future of work is that we don't know if people are going to go back to the office, how they're going to go back to the office. How are we even going to use space? So I always try to think back to that concept of how might we build, honestly, not knowing what this building is going to do in 5-10 years. And that I think is just a helpful mindset to be in. Again, please know I have no hardware experience. So I love learning from those of you who do.
Okay, well, we've kind of reached the part of the meeting where we can open things up for general questions, and we have 4 minutes. So please feel free to unmute your microphone and join the conversation. Or we can end early.
What did you like about this today's sprint, and what could we do better next time?
Yes. Did we succeed at the purpose of this meeting?
I thought the great, I thought the discussion and the panel members were all great.
Brilliant, yeah.
They did a
Yes.
really nice job of talking to the topic and with their own wide experiences. It was a great discussion. And we have taped this, recorded this, and so that will also be up on the Twin Spin website if anybody wants to go back and be at the point. And I think between the questions and the discussion and the knowledge of the participants has really been great. And Alex, thank you for your organization of keeping the panel going and
Thank you, Dick.
and
And
organizing
I'll
it
say-
and organizing it. And I see
I'll say, and it's not,
I see Sanji, who's an MSSE, Master Software Engineering professor guy. He's gonna have students watch this. And it's not so much that everybody has to come away with, one way of doing things, but to get an idea, especially of people and teams and the difficulty in managing them, and kind of to get, I guess a phrase sometimes used as herding cats with programmers.
Mhm.
If you haven't seen that video clip. So thank you all. And if you get a chance, and interested in the Watts Humphrey Award, contact me or contact Isabel, and we'll see what we get. We'll see what we go from there. So thank you all, and have a good evening, and we'll be back next month on April 7th, I think it is, and we'll continue our 26th year of doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, team.
Bye.
Hey, Larry, how are you?